Good afternoon. It's Climate Week, so welcome to Empowering Environmental Change, how nonprofits can harness crypto for a greener future. I'm Paul Clolery. I'm editor-in-chief of the Nonprofit Times, the largest circulation business publication, nonprofit management. And we're joined today by a number of people who are both in the environmental and nonprofit space and in the digital currency space. This event is co-hosted by the Giving Block and the Climate Vault. Crypto has been criticized for its environmental impact, but what are the possibilities when it comes to choosing a greener path? This panel will discuss how organizations are working together to address crypto's carbon footprint, scale innovation, climate solutions, and support philanthropy. Many people, including me, have questions regarding digital currencies, their value, their backing of as a currency, and the impact on the environment of mining of cryptocurrencies. The group, including panelists from nonprofits, will get into all of that during the next 60 minutes. There'll be time to answer questions from those watching and listening in, so send the questions through the platform. So let's get started. We're going to introduce everybody, and we'll do it really quickly in a round robin format. First, we have Pat. Pat from the Giving Block. Take it away.
Thanks, Paul. I'm Pat. I'm co-founder of the Giving Block. We help nonprofits take crypto donations, and then we run a lot of the major fundraising campaigns like Crypto Giving Tuesday in the sector.
Okay, Chris.
Yeah, my name is Chris Zulke. I'm with DRW Trading Group, which is a global proprietary trading organization. In addition to our trading activities, we have a pretty significant venture capital business that has been particularly focused on green energy and other climate improving innovations in the space.
Alexa.
Hi, my name is Alexa. I'm the individual giving manager at Trees for the Future. I manage a portfolio of over 3,000 donors, bringing in $1.6 million this past year, which is roughly 13% of our overall donation revenue. Trees for the Future is a nonprofit that is breaking the cycles of climate change, hunger, and poverty by training farmers in sustainable agriculture, which starts with planting trees. This past year, we surpassed over 300 million trees planted and 300,000 people out of poverty and hunger. We were the 12th nonprofit to work with the Giving Block, and we were one of the first environmental nonprofits to accept cryptocurrency. Since 2019, we have raised over $1 million in cryptocurrency. I'm so excited to be here today to share all that I've learned with nonprofit professionals in this space.
All right, thanks. Brendan.
Hey everyone, I'm Brendan, and I'm with Bye Plastic Foundation. We are a disruptive foundation removing single-use plastics from the music industry. We work with DJs, artists, we activate at music festivals, and yeah, happy to be here and ready to discuss.
You can get us all tickets to something, right?
Oh yeah, I'll have to look at that maybe.
Jason. Jason, your microphone's not on.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, my name is Jason. I'm from Climate Vault. Climate Vault works with our donors, corporations, and individuals to help them reduce and remove their carbon emissions. We've been operating for just a little over two years and have so far reduced 1 million tons of carbon from going into the atmosphere. In my role looking after operations, I ensure that our donors get the most benefit when they work with us.
All right, I think that's everyone here. Let's kind of set the stage a little bit up. So Pat, let's talk a little bit about what is cryptocurrency, what makes it different from traditional money.
Yeah, I'll keep this pretty high level. We used to always have a slide on this where we'd say Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, and like microwaves, combustion engines, like a bunch of stuff where if you went to buy a car, they wouldn't talk about pistons. So we won't be saying Bitcoin uses cryptographic proof of work to authorize transactions or any of that. Largely what cryptocurrencies do, why Bitcoin was invented, why all these other cryptocurrencies have sprung up, is it solves certain problems and then combines certain positive features of different types of money, investments, and stores of value like gold. So some cryptocurrencies have things like scarcity built in, a limited set of cryptocurrencies where you can't inject more supply. People print US dollars all the time. It decreases the value of the individual units. That's inflation. So it's like anti-inflationary when you have a limited set of cryptocurrencies. They use something called blockchain to make it a immutable record-keeping system. All that means is if you send money somewhere, it actually gets there without any intermediaries like banks. And if someone wanted to change a transaction record for one of these cryptos, they can't. It requires kind of 51% approvals of changes, a giant network of computers. In short, you can't change the record keeping system. You can't pretend you sent money somewhere you didn't. No one can claim to own your cryptocurrency when you have it, and you can move it anywhere in the world in a matter of seconds. It's a very efficient type of money when it's used like money. An investment when you want to move into and out of exposure to different risk, and then a store of value in the sense that you can hold on to something like Bitcoin knowing there will never be more than 21 million units. It's kind of why people invest in it, and they use it for, all sorts of stuff.
Okay, Chris, how do people and organizations use cryptocurrency from an investment to a transaction?
Yeah, so Pat mentioned this a little bit, but one way is just an outright investment in the underlying digital asset itself. Something to remember here, though, is most digital assets are fundamentally different from one another. And oftentimes those assets themselves are used as a utility token associated with the network itself that the token is associated with, perhaps to pay for a transaction on that network, for instance. But what I think is most important at the global scale is that there is an emergence of digitized money, if you will, oftentimes called stable coins. You might also hear something called CBDCs, which are central bank digital currencies. Why I think this is important is it represents a significant step in access to banking and financial systems globally. You could argue that there are many regions in the world that the infrastructure associated with banking is, albeit impossible, to establish. With digital assets such as stablecoins, you're able to co-opt the financial systems of others that have built it in a decentralized sort of way, effectively making banking services capable to those that otherwise wouldn't have it. So more and more, we're seeing them used for payments, for store value, for cross-border remittance, and the like, which are ultimately having a net positive impact on the overall cost, both in terms of dollars and in terms of carbon footprint of financing transactions globally.
All right, Pat, why is crypto growing in significance with nonprofits? The rank and file nonprofit is used to getting a check or getting some sort of transfer from a donor. Why crypto? What are the different areas that crypto philanthropy is getting accepted in?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So crypto to nonprofits can mean three different things in terms of opportunities they can access. The main one you just hit on is accepting crypto donations, which is what I'll run through. Second piece is as an investment, which is incredibly rare, right? There's a handful of nonprofits who choose to hold the crypto they receive as a donation or to separately invest in it through their endowment or putting it on their books. And then the third is actually using crypto, blockchain, NFTs, any of these use cases to do things like banking the unbanked or sending international remittances across borders, giving someone an NFT as a refugee to make sure they can access their bank account or reunite with their family when they enter a new region. For almost all nonprofits, it starts and stops with crypto acceptance, which usually means a donor can send you crypto. It instantaneously sells using a tool like the Giving Block for cash, US dollars. You just take those US dollars and apply it to your mission. Whether or not crypto is part of your investment thesis or something you're personally interested in is kind of neither here nor there. Why nonprofits are getting into it is just kind of through a connection of the dots to understand the opportunity set and why it's being accessed. So the majority of Forbes top 100 nonprofits in the US today are building fundraising programs. Vast majority of whom are doing that with the Giving Block, but I'll stop promoting at that point. They're doing it because there's hundreds of millions of users, right, who have cryptocurrency. There's over $1 trillion invested. So in short, there's a lot of money in it, a lot of users. It's not going anywhere. ETFs, right, are going to come rolling out. Institutions are putting money in. Venture capital flows in here. More developers than ever are building on it. So they recognize there's hundreds of millions of people who use money and invest a certain way. They might as well accommodate it as a giving method. Second piece as to why they kind of target it more proactively is the tax incentive. In the US, same thing with stocks. Any appreciated asset you can transfer to a charity and you owe no capital gains taxes on it. That means the bigger the gift, the more and more incentivized you are as a donor if you have crypto to give that crypto rather than your cash. You could give $1 million you have in the bank, or you could send $1 million in Bitcoin, Ethereum. you owe no capital gains taxes. You could erase, up to 250 grand in capital gains tax liability there, and then immediately buy more crypto with what you have in the bank. It's an incredibly powerful tax arbitrage move. And with millions of people incentivized to do that, it's important. That's why the average gift size is usually 40 to 80 times higher for cryptocurrency than regular online transfers. Same thing with stocks, other types of investment. And then finally, you take all of those things and you pair it with the fact that all of these users are, well, not all of them, but the average user is incredibly young compared to most donation methods. So 94% are millennials and Gen Zs. Almost 90% of millennial millionaires in the States are crypto investors. Pair that with the great wealth transfer. As they're receiving more money, you can expect them to continue these investment patterns. So more and more of the money that's potentially accessible, 90% of wealth is held in assets, will be moving into the hands of people who tend to invest this way. Connect, I guess, all of those dots at the end here, right? You have millions of people who are tending to be younger than the average donor, higher average net worth than the average donor, massive tax incentive to give this particular donation method. When they see this on the donate page, other ways to give page versus something else, you combine all those things together and it's an opportunity to build a future-proof donor database and to drive pretty good revenue outcomes in the short term.
All right, let's go to Alexa and then Brandon. Your organizations are involved in this. What were some of the common concerns that your organizations had and misconceptions that you had early on? I'm gonna go to you first, Alexa.
Yeah, I think that we had misconceptions and concerns that were similar to many of the organizations that might start looking into accepting cryptocurrency, based on the narrative in the mainstream media. And so we did a lot of research to better understand how whether those environmental concerns related to cryptocurrency are valid, how they apply to us. But ultimately, we had great conversations with the Giving Block who were able to help to demystify and help us better understand just how valid or how much we should uphold those concerns. And overall, we recognized that there was a large community of people within that held cryptocurrency and that were part of the cryptocurrency space that were interested in donating cryptocurrency to environmental nonprofits, and we wanted to be an option for them. And so moving past those misconceptions and concerns and meeting donors where they were at was ultimately how we found our way through.
All right, Brendan.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most common misconceptions is that crypto is about making money. And what we found over our experience in Web3 and crypto is that what has drawn all these people together to this space is looking for an alternative to our current marketplace and the current way we transact, because something has not been working. It hasn't been working for a long time. It's why, Climate Week NYC exists. It's why we have flooding, we have massive environmental damage across the world today. And what crypto really is about is people coming together to find a way to include social impact into the way we transact, which is what we focused on through our social impact token. And it's kind of how we see the community developing over the next, 10, 20, 30 years. New generations coming together to solve some of our grand challenges using financial instruments.
Right, Pat, let's talk a little bit about some of the regulatory and environmental challenges, and we'll come back to the nonprofits on our panel here to talk a little bit about some of the environmental challenges. Pat, why don't you take it from there?
Yeah, I think I can set you all up for a lot of these talking points, Brendan and Chris. But in short, crypto has been looking for regulatory clarity for quite some time. It's just like any other market. Without the regulatory clarity, it's tough to know where you stand when you're opening new institutions and exchanges or certain use cases that are coming to light. Like, people want to know what they can build and how to build it and what boxes to check. So we're getting a lot more of that clarity, which a lot of the sector views as a good thing. And then when it comes to the environmental concerns, historically, proof of work cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and even Ethereum before the changeover do use a great amount of energy per capita, like on each transaction, compared to proof of stake and these other technologies you guys will hit on. but we're seeing a lot of these cryptocurrencies move to proof of stake and more efficient methods. It's just kind of growing pains as the technology comes out. And I think over space and time, most experts who look at the space will assume that in the next few years in particular, things like cryptocurrencies that are built on code versus traditional financial sector, skyscrapers, banks, credit cards, little sheets of plastic you swipe and dump into a landfill. People do bet on things like cryptocurrency and code to become more environmentally efficient than things like traditional finance that require this giant infrastructure.
Before we get into talk to Alexa and Brandon, I just remember what Pat was saying made me think years ago when I was standing in the newsroom of a newspaper that I was working for, and the city editor came out and said, oh, by the way, your paychecks next week are going to be deposited in the bank across the street, and you're going to get this little card where you can go up to this ATM machine and you can take out your salary, you can take out $5 at a time, you can transfer it to your, and everybody in the newsroom was like, this is never going to work. So now everybody's got an ATM card. Everybody uses their credit cards they tap it and they get their latte in the morning. So how long do you think that technology is going at the speed of light? How long do you think that it'll be before people won't blink before doing this? Pat, Alexa,
sure.
Anybody?
I'm happy to take that. People are already using this is the answer.
Right.
As with any technology, there's an adoption curve, and it obviously starts slow, and it's kind of got an S shape to it, right? It starts slow, it hits an inflection point, and then eventually it plateaus. And what we're seeing right now from the trading perspective is digital assets have created an immense incentive to use them for the purposes of transacting and sending value because of how quick it could happen, because of how secure it is, and frankly, because of how operationally efficient it is. Now, I think it will take time before it becomes a more common use case within like an individual's everyday life, but we're already seeing major organizations that people are very used to using day to day offer crypto payment mechanisms, Visa and MasterCard, PayPal, Square. These organizations are integrating crypto payments as part of their offerings. And over time, we think it'll become more and more adopted and frankly, more and more abstracted away because the end user likely won't care what the underlying asset is as long as the value moves appropriately. And kind of core to our ethos is you should use market-driven efforts to drive change in a positive way. And what that really means is incentive alignment. We as an organization have been had a long-standing belief that we should be proactive in things like being carbon neutral, which we have been since 2020. But you also need an alignment of incentives in order to move people over. And what I believe is happening as a result of the adoption of stablecoins is those organizations that facilitate payments are finding that it's actually cheaper and their margins can improve and the cost of operating goes down. And frankly, their carbon emissions can go down in kind of a net global scale if they start to utilize these more efficient technologies. So I think that will drive additional adoption over time.
Well, maybe I can jump into with maybe a little more grounded example. I'm going to drop this link in the chat if anybody wants to look it up later. But in 1995, Bill Gates ended up on Letterman, and he was talking about the internet and what it would do when it came out. And he was mocked on public TV in 1995 for what he thought the internet would do to the world. And you fast forward 5 years later, everybody had websites, everybody's using email. It became a normal part of our lives. And that's kind of where we are in crypto right now. It's going to happen like that. But once it happens, you're going to want to understand what a wallet is. You're going to want to have crypto at some level integrated into your organization. You're going to want those processes in place. So if you want to not get behind the curve, which I think a lot of organizations were in the internet revolution, this is a great time to kind of start integrating crypto today.
Yeah,
So,
one last, sorry,
that
Paul.
That Brandon with the Gates reference that wasn't part of the stupid pet trick segment, right?
I don't think so.
We used to use the Gates stuff too. I apologize because I know we're all piggybacking the same question. Just one thing on this. I think it's also important to note that like a big reason for the confusion and the lack of adoption is like people like us who like to talk about the technology and how deep. That's what we've been talking about leading into this presentation. It's the same thing happening with ChatGPT. It worked on me also. Like for a while, I didn't touch ChatGPT until I realized you just type words into the thing. You're like, write an email for me, and it just does it. You're like, oh, it's just like a Google search bar. You just type words and just tell it what you want, and you get it. It's like Google is infinitely more complex than like anything. We're talking about like search engines, how they operate the internet, right? You pull your phone out of your pocket and use the cell towers and everything else. It's like eventually, to everyone's point, like the complexity gets extrapolated away and you can just use it. Right now, if charities want to take crypto, it's the same as setting up any other payment method. You set up an account with a vendor. If you're someone who wants to invest in crypto, you open a Coinbase account. It looks identical to opening a Schwab account. There's a lot of complexity in like understanding the underlying tech that's completely unnecessary. And people just need to, I think over time, you just kind of accept that, again, like you're not going to know how your microwave works. You're just like happy it makes the food hot. Crypto is going to end up in a similar position once we get people like us off stages talking about blockchain every time we get the chance.
I remember I was the kid in the newsroom 100 years ago who knew what a C prompt was and what it was used for. Now, now I'm sort of the Luddite of the group that's currently on this panel. But the thing is curious to me is how many different cryptocurrencies there are and how the platforms are actually working. Some of the success stories that the nonprofits have been having with regard to it. And I was shocked when I saw CARE was taking more than 40 different digital currencies through its system. And I was surprised that it had all worked so smoothly. Again, the Luddite view of this. So Alexa, why don't you talk a little bit about the success stories and the tactics that you used for implementation?
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks to the Giving Block, we actually can accept more than 80 different cryptocurrencies. And just quickly before I get into our success stories, I think what makes all of those different cryptocurrencies so interesting and unique is that we have the opportunity of working with communities within each different cryptocurrency blockchain, and they have connected an ethos, and there's like an underlying ethos and value system within their blockchain. So there are certain cryptocurrencies that have come up more recently, like Avalanche and Solana, Algorand, that make environmental consciousness and responsibility a main part of their values. And they reach out to us and they want to not only support us through donations, but different projects and initiatives so that they can not only push forward the values that they have within that cryptocurrency, that blockchain, but like further that through supporting us, which I think is really interesting. But to get into success stories, I would say our highest achievement is that we received one of the largest charitable crypto donations in history from a NFT called Woody's NFT. They're wonderful. They are a story-based NFT that it's sort of like a gamified Web3 experience. And tree planting is the basis of their story and their mission. And so they wanted to donate a portion of every sale that they had to our organization, Trees for the Future. Receiving a donation, that process actually came very quickly. It was like a week before from first conversation with them to receiving that gift. But the foundation that we had built before that, I think, is what ultimately led to our success in us receiving that donation. So that was in October of 2021. We started accepting cryptocurrency in 2019, and we put a strategy in place more in like late 2020, early 2021. I would say that the three pillars of our success were better understanding the language. I know we talk about not being too techy, and I could try to understand, and I still only know like a quarter of what you guys are talking about. But to be able to speak to the donation process and understand the language that is involved there, as well as the different ways that somebody can make a cryptocurrency donation through their NFT project, that was really essential for us because we could act as collaborators with NFT groups when they wanted to make their gift versus sort of sitting on the sidelines and leaving it all up to them. I think being an active participant in those conversations was really important. In addition to that, understanding the space and being able to show our interest in cryptocurrency and NFTs and not just be sort of bystanders or curious or concerned, making NFT groups or donors sort of feel like outsiders to our fundraising portfolio. We wanted to bring them in and make them feel just as important as any other donor, which leads me to my third pillar, which is meeting them where they're at. There's a lot of mystery behind crypto donors, but the reality is that we do know a lot about them. As Pat said, a lot of them are younger, all of them live online. So you can use that and have a better understanding of how to engage and communicate with them. We found that a lot of crypto donors live on Twitter. So we were able to make posts specifically for them and engage with them online. I think before we started really pushing cryptocurrency, we were ready to retire Twitter because we were not seeing any engagement on it. And then like overnight, we gained like hundreds of followers because we were just engaging with NFT groups on Twitter, and it was my favorite space. So before I keep ranting, that's basically how we got to ultimately receiving our Woody's gift, and that was very wonderful and very exciting.
It's been a while since I've seen anybody that excited about Twitter.
I know. I mean, it was more. I loved like tweeting and engaging with them. Like I would ask the Woody's community to share what their avatars or their Woody's avatars look like, and they would all tell me the story of their avatar, and it was just so cool to see how engaged and interested they were, because when you work with an NFT group, you're not just working with the people who create the group, you're working with every single person who has bought an NFT, which can be hundreds of thousands of people. So that was what excited me more necessarily groups.
So Brendan, tell us about a little bit about your organization, Bye Bye Plastic Foundation, and some of the successes and that you've had for that.
Yeah, so we haven't focused so much on taking crypto's donations, but what we've done is actually launched a token, which we are working to integrate into our operations, essentially as a way to track and encourage social impact. So what's cool with a lot of cryptocurrencies is you can build in social impact mechanisms into the currency, which is really unique. If you think of like a US dollar, once you spend that dollar, it doesn't do anything, right? It's done. With cryptocurrencies and whatever token you develop and launch, you can create secondary mechanisms that encourage some sort of action that you want. So it could be something like using this token will encourage plastic pollution reduction, or it might encourage just awareness of a certain cause. So in the past, what we've done is we've distributed tokens, and people who have used water bottles instead of plastic water bottles have received the tokens, and they could exchange them for some type of reward. In 2024, what we're looking at is actually how to develop an entire network across festivals and countries that use this token as a way to coordinate plastic pollution reduction. And again, that's a really cool thing you can do with cryptocurrency. You can coordinate a large number of people to a certain cause. It's kind of what Alexa was talking about with NFTs. They do the same thing. They get a bad rap because of all of the speculation and price going up and down, but at its core, these are instruments that coordinate large numbers of people to some sort of community and cause, and you get hundreds of thousands of people sometimes, all in these digital communities. And I think, as a charity organization, that's a very unique thing to do. For us at festivals, after the festival's done, how do you engage with people? How do you get them to continue, supporting your cause or fighting for, reduction of plastic pollution? And crypto is kind of the way we see that happening over the next decade.
All right. People have a lot of concerns about crypto on a number of levels. How do you, Jason? How are you guys mitigating some of the concerns, and how are you navigating some of the obstacles? Jason, first tell us what your organization is, what you do, and then if you could answer the question, please.
Yeah, sure. So I'm with Climate Vault, and we help various organizations reduce and mitigate their carbon footprint. On how do you mitigate the concerns of crypto? So if we build on what Pat said earlier, that's where a lot of the wealth will be. It's there now, it's growing. If we build on what Alexa was talking about, is that there are mechanisms such as the giving block, which allow you to accept cryptocurrency. It allows you to meet donors where they are and where they want to be. And if you build on what Brendan was saying, was you're just seeing a lot of success engaging online. if I'm a business leader and I'm a not-for-profit that's looking at using crypto, just like any business decision I'm making, I have to consider the environmental impact. We're seeing that with certainly everybody we work with because of the space we're in, but all decisions, be it a not-for-profit, a corporation, or an individual, you kind of have to ask the question, what environmental impact is this having? Is it making me have a larger impact than I would have otherwise? Is it reducing it? Basically, does the planet care about this activity in a way that is an increasing climate impact? So we're seeing this more and more, that decision makers have this as part of their decision set when they're accepting things. So when they start to look at cryptocurrency, it's important that those decision makers understand the impact that accepting cryptocurrency would have. Now, as Alexa was saying, some of the ethos of some of the cryptocurrencies has environmental impact built right in, and that's a great thing. We love seeing that. We love seeing that more and more. Organizations or cryptocurrencies that are self-governing their climate impact, we love that. And then, of course, there's the reality that a lot of that wealth is already in blockchain, which is a proof of work and still is a proof of work. We love the switch of Ethereum to go to proof of stake. But if you are going to accept cryptocurrency, you're probably not going to be selective. You're probably going to want to be in a position where you can accept all of the cryptocurrencies and whatnot. So you just need to think through, how is that environmental impact? What do I do about that? So organizations like Climate Vault, we help organizations and donors make sure that their transactions are actually carbon neutral. Actually, DRW, Chris, they've worked with us since 2020 to make sure that their organization is carbon neutral, and also that the energy impact from their crypto trading is actually carbon neutral. So if I'm a leader of an organization looking to accept crypto, first of all, our panel would say you should, and you should stop worrying about the technology. I love that point. I think a lot of the conversation gets into the technology where, as everybody's pointed out, that's going to go away. It's just going to be a way of life. But a real concern is making sure that the impact on the planet is actually mitigated, and working to ensure that as you accept cryptocurrencies, you've made sure you've covered the bases there.
All right. There are a lot of elephants in the room, when it comes to the crypto, digital, and the environment and concerns and solutions. Chris, renewable energy, energy sourcing. Talk a little bit, if you could, about crypto past and crypto future. We're talking about green mining and that sort of thing. Tell people what mining actually is, how it works, and talk about how the industry is driving that forward, driving forward green mining.
Sure. So I want to start by giving Jason the compliment here. Full disclosure: Don Wilson, the founder and CEO of DRW, my firm, was also the co-founder of Climate Vault, and he's long held an ethos that we have a responsibility. And our responsibility not only is to be conscious of and support green energy initiatives, but it's also to use our skill set to try to advance those forward. And one of the reasons why we like working with Climate Vault so much is kind of like the market-driven approach they've had to offsetting carbon standards or carbon footprints. And it's been a great relationship thus far. So that's kind of step one, right? The easiest thing, as silly as it sounds, is to be conscious of your footprint and take steps to offset it. But what I find fascinating about the digital asset space is many of the people building come from a very principled place, that they seek social change, they seek disruption for the betterment of the globe. Like, that's kind of the core ethos of a decentralized digital asset world, in which you don't rely on certain centralized organizations that control the way it works. And so historically, one of the biggest criticisms of crypto assets is the total energy expenditure for what we call mining Bitcoin. And while avoiding getting into the technology here, at its core, it uses something called proof of work to confirm transactions. And you need that confirmation to exist in a very methodical way, given the decentralized nature of the way these transactions take place. The problem is, in order to do so, you have to solve a very computationally complex mathematical problem. And effectively, everyone that is running a computer that tries to solve this problem is all racing towards that solution. And then once one finds it, they all start to race towards the next solution. So there's this incentive to keep deploying more technology, more computers, consume more energy to try to confirm these transactions because there's a reward associated with it. What I think is most fascinating is Ethereum, which is largely considered the most important L1 as it exists today, L1 being a layer 1 protocol, which at its core allows it to kind of programmatically define and execute transactions, heard that concern because they were originally proof of work. They moved to something called proof of stake. So rather than using computers to solve complex mathematical problems to confirm transactions, they now rely on computers that effectively say, we have some Ethereum. We will effectively post that Ethereum. And if the network believes that we're acting in a negative way, the network will take our Ethereum away from us. So rather than solving a very complicated mathematical problem, people are now effectively putting their money up to say, you can trust us because we have money on the line. As a result of that shift, and granted, this shift happened in about a span of 8 years. If you think about the timelines of the automotive industry, if you think about the timelines of the data center industry, if you think about the timelines of the fossil fuels industry, we have a technology that was created about 8 years ago that in a very short period of time fundamentally changed the way it works and reduced its total energy consumption by somewhere on the order of 99.9%. That was a decentralized initiative pushed by people that had a principle that they wanted to implement, which was to reduce the carbon footprint of the blockchain. Now, I mentioned earlier, stablecoins. Stablecoins often live on these sorts of networks. So you have effectively created a decentralized network that makes it possible to pay people and conduct transactions globally that has a carbon footprint of somewhere on the order of 1/46,000th of the total energy consumption of YouTube Direct. To put it in other words, proof of stake Ethereum's total energy consumption is 46,000 times smaller, sorry, 4,600 times smaller than YouTube Direct's energy consumption for powering a financial ecosystem, all based on the innovation that this technology brought. So while I believe there's still work to be done, we can't ignore the fact that the innovation could take place quickly and that it will take place in a profound sort of way.
All right, Pat, you wanted to jump in here on some of the efficiencies and the scalability of this. And actually, we had a question from one of the people listening in, if this can be used for payroll. I thought that was a great question, and you said it's remarkably uncommon. Why? If there are firms involved in crypto and digital currency, why would payroll be uncommon?
Yeah, it's a great question. So similar to why people don't buy their groceries with things like stocks, anytime you enter or exit, it's a taxable event. Any enter or exit a position rather. So like if you are holding an asset that people are speculating on the price of, the price can go up or down. If it went up, then you owe taxes on the gains. If it went down, then you can of course report those losses. But there's complexity to move into and out of an asset class, right? That's speculated upon. Chris touched on stable coins, which are cryptocurrencies in principle, right? They can move across these same networks, incredibly efficient. It's fast to transfer money from position A to position B, but it's pegged to something like the US dollar or some other country's fiat currency. You could effectively use things like this for payroll, but there are regulatory questions around whether or not these events are taxable or not across space and time based on how they're categorized. And then there are also just questions around like having to move money from what's already in a bank account into these stable coins, and then needing all of the users at the other end of these transactions to have stablecoin accepting wallets or exchange accounts where they can receive those. Then they have to ultimately get it to their bank, because people in short aren't accepting money as the individual employees in cryptocurrency as like a common mode of payment. And because they're not using cryptocurrencies to pay for most things at stores, it creates kind of unnecessary complexity in terms of how you distribute the funds and how the end user receives the funds and ultimately uses them. If you have a really expensive payroll system, or you're trying to handle things like international payments and remittances, and you can't get money to where it needs to be, like we've even paid developers when it makes sense and when like legal approves it in cryptocurrency, because we've had folks involved in like the Russia-Ukraine crisis, right? Not able to access bank accounts. Like there are reasons why sometimes it makes sense to move money using crypto, but those are some of the top line considerations anyway.
Just FYI, last night I was in Manhattan for something and I hadn't had dinner. I walked into a little bodega on Amsterdam Avenue on 106th Street, picked up a bottle of seltzer and a package of devil dogs, and the gentleman at the counter said, cash, credit, or crypto. So I could have bought my devil dogs with crypto.
Can I hit on something real quick on that? The Internet Archive, early crypto enthusiast nonprofit, set up a Japanese restaurant right by their offices to accept crypto, and they were really into it, and they were paying for meals using crypto in the early days. Kind of classic Bitcoin Pizza Day story, where they were, you know, paying with multiple Bitcoins and stuff, and the couple was convinced to take it, which could have gone one of two ways, right? Like if Bitcoin went to zero, then they'd say that they were scamming this couple. This is not the way it went. They were not super tech savvy, which ended up being valuable. You hear about traders like this all the time, where they sat on it pretty much because they weren't paying attention to the markets. And then 2017 happened. It was the first like real super public Bitcoin bull run, and it ran up to like $20,000 a unit. And that couple realized they had more than enough money sitting in a Bitcoin wallet to retire. They helped them sell that Bitcoin, and unfortunately the restaurant closed as a result, which is understandable. And that couple is off probably on an island somewhere. But it's an example of, I guess, why people take crypto. If you are, if you're a store user, you're an athlete, like sometimes you hear about people getting paid in crypto, it costs money to buy the crypto to move into and out of an asset. So you can get like the full units minus the fees. If it's large amounts, it can be valuable. And it's also a way for companies to get like exposure to the asset without necessarily deciding on it. That's why some charities also hold the crypto they receive. It's harder to get like board approval to go buy crypto, but if someone wants to transfer it to you, you can hold it. You can kind of get a natural exposure to it. Anyway, it's relatively uncommon, but kind of cool.
Just thinking of your restaurateurs, and all of a sudden flashed in the back of my head Office Space and the guy sitting on a beach with a glass with an umbrella and they're trying to get the waiter's attention. Sorry, I digress. Let's talk a little bit, Pat and Chris, about eco gift offset programs, how nonprofits can offset crypto energy use through their new initiatives between Climate Vault, Giving Block. Jason, then Pat, please.
Yeah, sure. Let me kick that off. So the Giving Block's doing a lot of great work, right? They're allowing not-for-profits to accept all these different types of crypto. They're making that accessible. They're making that easy. They're bridging that gap between where that wealth is and where those donors are and where those not-for-profits are. They reached out to Climate Vault earlier this year and said, you know, in addition to the good we're bringing to the donors and the causes, we also want to make sure that we're doing so in a manner that is environmentally responsible. And so that's how EcoGift came. And for what EcoGift basically allows donors and not-for-profits to do is to accept cryptocurrency and do so in a manner that is carbon neutral, so that those concerns that they have about ensuring that you're not having a negative impact on the planet while you're doing your work are actually completely taken care of. Climate Vault's base system, we have a unique immediate reduction and removal system that helps organizations remove their carbon now or remove their carbon footprint now, and it leads to an eventual removal. Using EcoGift, we will look at the cryptocurrency in question. We'll understand its impact on how many tons of carbon that transaction posed, and then using Climate Vault system, we'll actually make sure that's mitigated so that transaction takes place in a carbon neutral way. Basically, bringing all the benefits, all the great things that crypto brings, but ensuring that any concerns around climate impact are completely mitigated. And Pat, I'll come back to you for any other parts of that you'd like to add, of course.
Yeah, I mean, you both, Jason, Chris, Brendan, you guys have much more technical understanding of a lot of this. My general thing that I wanted to figure out when we were setting up EcoGift is like on a per transaction basis, what does that look like? Which is very different than like the amount of energy that an entire network consumes. Sometimes we talk about it internally, it would be very similar to saying like, whether or not you want to work with Exxon as like a corporate partner and a sponsor across a large campaign versus whether or not you're willing to accept donations from people who use gasoline. It's very, in terms of the carbon footprint of the individual, what's going on a per transaction basis, even for things like Bitcoin that use a lot more energy than other cryptocurrencies. I think what we learned from the process is accepting an individual transaction that ultimately goes into a block, and then all of these computers are like cracking these codes. Any transaction of any, normal size and above, like tends to be worth it in terms of the impact of the transaction. Things like microtransactions with, a smart contract and a zillion, 1 cent transactions happening on something like a Bitcoin network can be a different consideration. But beyond that, I think we were pleasantly surprised to see how little energy is being used on a per transaction basis. I think it makes people feel a lot more comfortable taking it. And that's ultimately what allowed us to do the 2x carbon offset, and then to dive into things like Climate Week and other fundraisers and things we're doing to drive funds into the hands of Trees for the Future and other folks that are doing actual work on the ground. One ironic thing that I think is obvious to us, but not to everybody, is the one type of nonprofit where it's always, of course, economically sensible to or ecologically sensible to take crypto is an environmental charity, because if it's a single transaction using a limited amount of energy going to a nonprofit that does direct climate change offset work, that's always, of course, good for the environment. But like sometimes you'll see those nonprofits being the most concerned about accepting like a single $100,000 transfer in the form of Bitcoin, let's say, because they're like, oh, what if this is bad for the environment? And just like mathematically, it's like, it's not, because you're using 100 grand to do carbon offset work or whatever it is you're doing. So that's, I guess, one of the paradoxical aspects of this too, trying to get the environmental nonprofits into taking it. One, helping them understand that each individual transaction is a lot less carbon impactful than they think. Two, even that carbon impact is offset now through EcoGift and the collaboration we did to develop it. And then three, because you are a environmental nonprofit, like any donations you're getting is ultimately going to a good place. And by kind of staying on the sidelines, what you're effectively doing is ensuring that all of these donations that would otherwise go to green efforts are going to other types of charities that aren't making as good of an impact, kind of inherently making these networks less green than they otherwise would be. So,
okay, Chris, then Jason, then back to Pat maybe on this question. We're talking carbon offsets here. So a really basically we were talking about currency as backed by fiats, governments, and that sort of thing. But states have a rule on how much carbon a business can spin out. So you're buying the credits of somebody who is not spinning off that much, so that an organization can continue to do what they're doing. Talk a little bit about the environmental questions that states are going to have. I know Texas, Nebraska, a few others are actively trying to bring mining organizations into their states. In the case of Texas, a power grid that from time to time can be shaky. So talk a little bit about the regulation in a state-by-state basis when dollars are regulated by a federal fiat rather than state-by-state fiat, and how many challenges you guys might have. And if that question is as clear as mud, I can help along the way.
So somewhere in the realm of as clear as mud is a decent characterization. I apologize, but trying to like figure out how to respond. What I think is important to recognize is that, as I understand it, and I want to kick this over to Jason ultimately because he's going to be the expert on this, is at the end of the day, there's not only one side to the carbon offset equation, in our opinion. Right? It's one thing to say there are 15 organizations that are willing to sell their credits, and then one organization like a mining facility in Texas willing to buy them. That doesn't reduce carbon footprint. All it does is keep it at the level that's mandated by regulations. And I believe one of the original theories and the hypotheses behind why Don wanted to start Climate Vault was you needed the other side of that in order to actually have a positive impact. Otherwise, you're just working within the regulatory structure. And if one state's regulatory structure didn't work for you, maybe you move to the next one, and maybe you move to the next one. And that's not really solving any problems. What we thought was important is that there was the other side of the equation that effectively said we now have some amount of capability to fund projects that will remove carbon from the atmosphere. So while regulations may say A, it's important that we go further than that and try to avoid a construct that like incentivizes regulatory arbitrage, and rather create a construct that incentivizes removal of carbon from the atmosphere beyond what the regulators might require. So Jason, that's my teeing up to you of how to like how I think about it, but I think you're gonna, knock this one out of the park.
Thanks for that, Chris. Also partially clears mud on, on Paul's question. So, yeah, Paul, what you're talking about is in a state-by-state system, there is opportunities for organizations to avoid the regulatory side. I think a lot of people that we work with and talk about think that there should be a national carbon market that regulates carbon across the board and kind of eliminates these state-by-state competitions. In addition, well, what Climate Vault's doing is we're working within those regulatory bodies to help have an immediate reduction in carbon. But as Chris was saying, and as in our ethos, and as Don believes in strongly, is we're leveraging that to support carbon dioxide removal. Like the ultimate, if we stopped emitting all carbon right now, we still have a problem. There's a bunch of carbon already in the atmosphere. So the quicker we can move people's support to carbon dioxide removal technologies that actually reverses the emissions we're putting out today, as well as remove those historical emissions, the better place we're going to be as a planet and as a society. And so part of our work and part of the organization that Don Wilson founded, I should say, is to ensure that we're setting up a system that allows people to have an immediate impact and an immediate reduction. And we leverage those compliance markets for that, but is also can be leveraged to support carbon dioxide removal so that in a market-based way, we're promoting carbon dioxide removal and making sure those organizations can thrive and actually have the impact. Paul, did that get where you wanted to go?
Pretty much, yeah. Just interesting to see the various states right now competing for corporations that are doing that type of work. So in other states that are less highly regulated than, say, New York and California.
Yeah. Now, there's also another element. Sorry to step on your words, Paul, but
jump on it, go.
There's a lot of waste energy out there. I'm not an expert. I know the barest minimum possible here, but as I understand it, there's a significant amount of waste energy. And one of the companies that we've invested in is called Crusoe. Crusoe is effectively trying to build cloud-based infrastructure services that can harness waste energy to reduce frankly, the waste that exists as a result of things like pulling natural gas or oil out of the ground. So they built technology that allows them to effectively use flares to power data centers, power Bitcoin mining rigs, et cetera, et cetera. So there's kind of two ways to go at this problem, one of which is what I think Jason is highlighting here, but the other is to be smarter about how we're using the energy that exists today, whether or not it's renewables, whether or not it's waste energy, whether or not it's stranded energy. There are ways to innovate here to reduce emissions in ways that people haven't, and waste in ways that people really haven't contemplated previously. And so I think it's important to look at every angle and innovate in each one of those vectors rather than just focus on a single opportunity.
Chris, we couldn't agree more. We need everything. We need all the things we can do to use energy more efficiently, to support CDR. All of these things need to come on play and be in play to avert the worst situations.
All right, Pat, did you want to jump in there on regulation?
Oh, the one thing I was just going to add is to the point about energy efficiency. Like one cool aspect, I think, of crypto mining that people outside the sector aren't totally aware of is there aren't a whole lot of sectors or technologies that can be turned on and off as effectively or as quickly as things like Bitcoin mining and just mining in general. That allows for, right, if you have an energy surge, right? You especially with renewables where it's less consistent, you get a lot of wind or solar, whatever it might be. A lot of energy coming in, you can turn on more of this mining network like very readily. And in terms of how regulation goes and like what the rules are around this, like it's much easier to do things like saying like, hey, stop crypto mining or pause it for a certain period or a certain percentage of it, and have that instantaneously turned off to make sure that a grid can accommodate it. That sort of efficiency doesn't exist elsewhere. So when you look at the amount of energy that gets consumed, that kind of lack of rigidity, right, that flexibility in the ability to use more energy or less energy at a moment's notice based on what's needed by a particular grid is pretty valuable. And it doesn't just, I guess it just doesn't come out in the numbers sometimes. So it's interesting to know.
Okay, a couple of things. We're getting close to the closing. Guys, if you have a final statement, comment or two, please get ready. But basically summarizing what we've talked about here, embracing the crypto opportunity, the discussion, we highlighted some of the potential for nonprofits in the crypto landscape. Doing it right means demystifying revenue streams, talking to your boards and others about the organization's mission and your donors, and talking to your donors about mission, overcoming barriers and concerns, reservations about nonprofit leaders might have about adopting crypto, and offered some actionable solutions to navigate these effectively. And we've talked a little bit about some success stories from the organizations we're talking to here, and some next steps. You know, as I've mentioned a few minutes ago, I'm pretty much the Luddite of the group, and learning a lot from listening to you. But one of the things I've noted in the last couple of months, and particularly studies done by Indiana University Center on Philanthropy, was the loss of middle-level donors. But also, surprisingly, the most recent information showed an almost 10% decrease in the donors from the high-end, richest donors in the world here in the US. 10% decline last year, in the first quarter of this year too, from the wealthiest donors. So it would seem to me that any place that a nonprofit can turn to generate additional income would be a smart thing to do, given the fact that the Giving USA numbers showed a remarkable decline. Granted that the amount of money raised by charities in the US exceeds the GDP of most nations in the world, but still, in nations in Europe, where the government handles most of the things that nonprofits in the US handle, it's a challenge that nonprofits have to raise more money, and they can't afford to be seeing reduced revenue. So anything to get money in the door sounds like it might be a good idea. So why don't we just do a quick round robin? Alexa, why don't you give us a final statement in sentence or two?
Ultimately, I think there's a lot that can be daunting or misunderstood about cryptocurrency or crypto philanthropy. But you'll be surprised by the relationships that you can build with crypto donors within the crypto community, and you'll be very proud of the impact that you're able to make. We've been able to plant more than 4 million trees and support thousands of farming families through the donations that we've received, and that impact only grows over time. So if you are curious or interested, please feel free to connect or reach out to me. And definitely keep an open mind. You'll be surprised.
Brandon.
Yeah, I mean, I think we shouldn't be surprised that we're seeing decreasing donations. The fastest growing demographics, Gen Z and millennials, largely look at institutions very distrustfully. They don't necessarily think that if you're giving money to certain places, it's going where you want or supporting the right causes that you want it to. What we do know, though, I think Pat mentioned this, is that crypto is where they're going to. It's what they transact in. It's more transparent. They have more visual acuity on where their money is going to end up. So I think what we're probably going to start seeing over the next few years is, as more organizations take crypto, engage with tokens, we're going to see those donations start rising again, and they're just going to come through a different conduit. And it's really going to be probably the organizations that are there, that are ready to talk to millennials, talk to Gen Z, talk to Gen Alpha, that are going to be able to benefit from that shift. So that's kind of how we're looking at it and position ourselves.
Chris, how about you?
Yeah, one correction and then my message. I said earlier that the ratio of YouTube Direct to Ethereum's proof of stake network on accident was 46,000 to 1. It's 4,600 to 1. I just want to make it clear. It's not fair to get that number wrong. But my message is, I think people look at digital asset and distributed ledger technology and try to see if it's the answer to the problem. But I think that's the wrong way to look at it. It's the right way to look at it is it's the substrate, it's the primitive that could be used as a building block to solutions to the problem. And that's what I think is the most fascinating and powerful part of this technology, is that it might not necessarily change the world, but I think it will empower many other people to make real significant changes in a very positive way, both in the green energy space, the climate space, as well as many other locations. So do your homework, learn about it, and figure out how you can harness it.
Right. Jason.
Very simply, if you're a not-for-profit leader, you should look at accepting crypto. Don't be intimidated. Us techno geeks will get off the stage pretty soon. It'll just become mainstream. Go find a good partner, Giving Block. They'll take care of making sure you can accept crypto. We're helping them make sure it's in an environmentally friendly way and get going on your mission. That's it.
All right, Pat.
Yeah, I guess I would say like something we don't say enough, I guess, by we, I mean me, on these panels is like put yourself in a position for donors to hand raise into these donation methods, like crypto, stocks, donor advised fund transfers, Apple Pay, stuff like that. Like I can't tell you how many nonprofits don't accept crypto or don't have like a digital stock solution because they're like, either we don't get these donation methods or like everyone who sends us stock, calls us or sends a fax or goes through an advisor. It's just like, it'd be like if you didn't have a website and you're like, no one finds us online. It's like, well, yeah, of course. So with things like crypto, we talked about a lot of crypto campaigns and fundraising strategies, all this stuff. It's really fun and awesome. Like you don't get to this $1 million level like Trees for the Future without some of that experimentation. But as a baseline thing, right? If you're sending out direct mail and people are opening letters, you have a gala, there's a pamphlet they're opening up, there's a packet that a major gift officer is putting on a desk. There's another ways to give page on your website. Like if donors aren't seeing crypto as an option, right? Like you're off the menu and you just lose to the nonprofits where they see it because these are donors who they don't work with financial advisors, they don't work with tax advisors, they're on TurboTax doing their own thing, right? They're not on Fidelity, Charles Schwab working with an investor or advisor. They buy crypto on Coinbase, they buy stocks on Robinhood, and if charities don't ask for it, there's literally no point that these tens of millions of people will even be aware of this tax incentive, let alone think of it as a mode of giving. It's up to nonprofits to put it in front of people, let them hand raise in. As long as you spread it out there, right, put it out there as an option, then beyond that, you can choose to do as much active fundraising as possible. But that piece in and of itself takes no time at all to set up a solution, pop it on your site, and make sure people can find it. I don't think there's a charity on the planet, so long as they have a website, where that shouldn't be the case.
All right. Well, thank you to our panelists and to the hosts of this, the Giving Block and the Climate Vault. And if you have any questions, go to both the Giving Block and Climate Vault, and I'm sure you'll get some questions answered and get additional information for your organization. Thank you to everybody who registered and is listening in today. Thank you for your time.
And subscribe to the Nonprofit Times.
www.thenonprofittimes.com.
Take it easy, folks.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Paul.